Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarayan Mukherjee. I'm the director of the Intermedia Research Studio at the Department of Sociology and a Climate Resilience Fellow with the Kule Institute of Advanced Studies at the University of Alberta. I'm speaking to you today from Amaskwatyu Waskagan here in Treaty 6 territory, also known by its colonial name of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Today is the first day of a pair of events dedicated to eco-feminist perspectives on climate resilience and on the theory and politics of degrowth. I'm deeply honored and absolutely thrilled to be able to introduce to you all in a moment the very distinguished political ecologist and ecofeminist, Dr. Stefania Barca, who will be giving our public lecture today titled Care Work and Post-Carbon Futures. This will be followed by a brief response from another distinguished emerging Indigenous feminist scholar, Dr. Angele Alook from York University. Tomorrow's event has a different format and is a roundtable seminar featuring Dr. Barca and two other emerging scholars from the Feminisms and Degrowth Alliance, Dr. Anna Sav and Mariam Abazari. The theme of this roundtable is eco-feminist degrowth and a feminist Green New Deal. Tomorrow, Dr. Sav will be starting us off with a brief talk titled Why Better Finance of the Care Sector Might Hack Capitalism, a proposal for transitioning to a care degrowth society. And this will be followed by a roundtable discussion on eco-feminist perspectives on Green New Deal politics, which folks on the call will be encouraged to join in. But this will also give you an opportunity to learn more about the Feminisms and Degrowth Alliance Research Network. I have to say that this network has been super important to my own research and thinking. And if there are folks out there who are looking for ways to connect feminist and ecological research to environmental activism, let me say that FADA is the place to be. So you can find out more about all of that tomorrow, also starting at 11 a.m. MST. Let me also note that now that both events, today and tomorrow, will be and is being recorded. And eventually these will be available on the KIAS website. Before I introduce Professor Barca, and as I turn to the university's boilerplate territorial acknowledgement, let me say a word or two about my ambivalence about the enthusiasm with which we've embraced this gesture at this university, and the relevance of the land acknowledgement to this set of events we have gathered for here specifically. As this university now makes loud claims about being a climate leader and cooks up rankings with which to award itself while appropriating reconciliation into its own branding, to honor the spirit of this land acknowledgement at this university, and as a political ecologist and energy humanist, I have to observe that this university has done nothing substantial to delink itself from the oil and gas industry's activities on Indigenous lands throughout the boreal forest. The University of Alberta was the core research institution that made bitumen mining possible, and despite its current destitution, remains deeply engaged in doing more of this kind of research, notably on carbon capture and hydrogen fuel, to keep bitumen mining going on in the name of climate action. As many of you will know, there is a concept in the social science and humanities that helps us understand such Orwellian inversions. We could call this form of purposeful leadership green passive revolution. Save the colonial order of things by changing everything but the essentials of political and economic power. Passive revolution, however, always has a more active plan B. We saw this when the Wexiters and the Diagolon Plaid Army laid siege to Ottawa this past February. And we have seen it before. The very same trucks were launched at the student climate justice demonstrators at the legislature here across the river in 2019, as many of you will remember. The main point I want to make here is that no acknowledgement of the land and its colonial history of accumulated violence can make any promise that we're on the road together here toward meaningful climate action, reconciliation, let alone decolonization, in such a political conjuncture with all its grave dangers. There is an eco-feminist concept especially relevant to this situation. Nation building, Canadian state formation, the construction of the bitumen commodity frontier, Canada's climate action plan are all part of a planetary scale war against subsistence, as Maria Mies and Veronica Ben-Holt-Thompson call it, and as Stefania Barca calls it, a war against the commons, which has been waged now for a very long time. Nothing here has changed in any significant way, even in the case of some discussions regarding Green New Deals or just transitions now going on. Some degrowthers have another concept to describe those hockey stick graphs you're all familiar with, which explains why they aren't changing direction. This is the accelerating social metabolism of the growth imperative, green or inclusive or otherwise, of our contemporary imperial mode of living. Both the land acknowledgement and the war against subsistence then requires the articulation of a radically transformative feminist politics, which we will engage ourselves with today and tomorrow. So let me then turn to our acknowledgement and rehearse what remains formally empty Orwellian brand speak, but does not have to. The University of Alberta respectfully acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker today. Professor Stefania Barca is a distinguished researcher in the Department of History at the University of Santiago de Compostela. Originally from Italy, in the last 12 years, she has worked as a senior researcher at the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra. In 2021, she held the position of Zennstrom Professor in Climate Change Leadership at the University of Uppsala. She has also received sabbatical grants from the Universities of Lund and Berkeley. Her research interests are in environmental history and political ecology, with a focus on the industrial age. Her Enclosing Water, Nature and Political Economy in a Mediterranean Valley was awarded the Turku Book Prize in 2011. Her latest book, Forces of Reproduction, Notes for a Counterhegemonic Anthropocene, was published by Cambridge University Press in 2020. She is active in feminist, climate, justice, and degrowth networks, and her work has been translated and disseminated in several languages. Stefania, now over to you.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and thanks also for your reflective notes on the acknowledgement of the university. I think it is indeed needed to have this critical approach to this. So I first of all thanks everyone for being here, and I am happy to see also Ryan and Anna, with whom I share our common let's say militants in the feminist degrowth network, and through which we have met. We have never met in person, so I am just happy to be able to have these exchanges virtually, because it really allows us to have transnational conversations. I also want to thank Angele for accepting to offer her reflections on my talk. Thank you very much for being here. And I also want to say hello to my former grad student, Krislane Rik, who I see here, and Krislane Rik came back. Hi, Krislane, who was a former student of mine at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. And I think he is now a postdoctoral scholar at Alberta. So let me share my screen. And please tell me if you can see it. Okay, great. So, sorry, just a second. So first of all, I want to also thank you for this opportunity, for sharing with you something that I've been working on over the past couple of years. let's say, as a continuation on my book, Forces of Reproduction, that Ryan was mentioning before. I'm exploring the literature and at the same time the mobilizations around the feminist Green New Deal, and more broadly around the nexus between the pandemic, care work, and the climate and ecological crisis. And by exploring these literature and activism, I found an invitation, a call that comes from both social movements and particularly feminist, degrowth, and climate justice movements, and from academics that work at the intersection of gender ecology and economics. So feminist economics, feminist ecological economics, and feminist political ecology. And this is a call and the urge to go going beyond the separate spheres of analysis and separate spheres of political action, and going beyond these separations between the ecological, the social, the gender, the decolonial, and the anti-racist, but to really take seriously the systemic nature of the current crisis, of the crisis that we are going through. And taking seriously this systemic nature means for all of us, scholars and activists, and very often both, to analyze and also act upon the system, no? The systemic nature of at least in three major crises of our time: the health crisis, the climate crisis, and the crisis of care. So I'm just a little bit slow with my yeah, here we go. So let me just first of all give you my understanding of care work, which is the topic of my talk today. I mean care work as the ensemble of paid and unpaid activities that provide for human needs and well-being, including the need for healthy food and a healthy environment. This work is often invisible and recognized as such, and takes place in homes, but also in communities and in the public sphere, in the urban environment, and as well as in the rural environment on the land, and in many earth systems where people meet subsistence needs. Waged workers, urban dwellers, peasants, and indigenous people perform different forms of care and subsistence work, often combining it with paid work, because people need money in this system. People need money to survive. National and global inequalities of sex, gender, class, ethnicity, ability, etc., heavily condition both the distribution of and access to care services, and the ways care workers are treated and compensated, often resulting in unsustainable burdens or life-threatening working conditions, as in the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 is only the latest manifestation of a global crisis of reproduction based on long-term processes of depreciation of care and of environmental degradation, affecting both human and non-human health, which are inextricably linked to one another. This pandemic has originated from the same root causes of climate change and the loss of biodiversity. First and foremost, a profoundly unhealthy, exploitative, and violent food system, which has not only heavily contributed to global warming, but also profoundly damaged non-human life, soil, water, and human labor in farming, fishing, grazing, and gathering worldwide. Moreover, a direct correlation seems to exist between the virus diffusion and atmospheric pollution due to carbon emissions. Quarantine restrictions have ended up reinforcing the same processes that have caused the crisis in the first place. By and large, peasant farming and local food provision networks have been undermined. Migrant farm labor, healthcare workers, and other categories of essential workers have been sacrificed without seeing their working conditions improved. Education and culture work further depreciated. Domestic work made more burdensome and unsupported. Low income and girls of color, women and girls of color, the population affected by a higher burden of unpaid care worldwide, have seen their work increased and their development possibilities diminished. The pandemic toll has been gravely worsened by generalized and decades-long processes of contraction of public health care and welfare services. And its distribution has followed pre-existing patterns of social inequality, hitting most heavily the people with lowest access to healthy living conditions. Precarious and marginalized workers, migrants and refugees, racialized, disabled, homeless, and other impoverished people have been disproportionately hit due to lack of access to proper and even minimal care services. A horrific increase in domestic and gender-related violence has accompanied the COVID-19 pandemic in many places. Here I have gathered, in this slide, I have gathered a few quotes from, one is from my book on the forces of reproduction, by which I mean the work of care and subsistence and commoning. My point is that the pandemic originates from and reveals systemic backgrounding of these, historically speaking, in the master model of modernity. I also gathered two quotes from scholar activists in the FADA community that Surayan was mentioning before. There's a paper that was collectively produced by the whole FADA community back in 2020 towards the provisioning economy, recognize and regenerate social and ecological reproductive capacities. You can all access this paper on the website of the degrowth and research and degrowth website. And then I gather here a quote from another paper that comes from the Ni Una Menos Italy, called Non Una Di Meno, that was also published back in 2020 as a response to the pandemic, because to me it signifies what I was mentioning before, this call coming from both academics and social movements for going beyond the separation between spheres of analysis and of mobilization. This key quote here says, extending care from singular bodies to that which allows them to persist, relations, ecosystems, the biosphere, the planet itself. This is the ground of encounter between feminist, trans-feminist, and ecological movements. And to me, it is very important that a trans-feminist movement like Ni Una Menos is acknowledging and giving relevance for their struggles to the ecological crisis and as related to the gender and gender violence and to the care crisis. As when it comes to scholars and to academic papers, I also gathered here a few quotes from recent papers in 2021 The first is from Farana Sultana, who is a well-known feminist political ecologist. The second is from Naila Kabir and co-authors, also very well-known feminist economists. And the third is from an article which is included in a special issue that Kabir and colleagues edited in 2021 in the journal Feminist Economics. And why this is important? Why just these quotes? Because especially the last two represent the fact that this convergence between feminist economics, scholars in feminist economics, and ecological and political ecology scholarship. It is important to there is a long history of research from feminist economists and around issues of provision and subsistence, and not only care work or social reproduction work, but also around the broader biophysical environment. But this scholarship is not really recognized as, let's say, as part of the feminist economics mainstream, so to speak. So this specialist issue represented to me was important because it represented the advancement of this recognition of the importance of really linking the two, which is key to the topic that we are interested today, no? The place of care work in the Green New Deal, in the politics of Green New Deal. So let me just very briefly, I think the last quote is the one that gives us a sense of what I'm speaking about. Responding to this crisis, the pandemic crisis, requires placing care for people and for the environment at the center of our economic systems. And so this is, I think this is really the core of what I'm interested in talking about at this point. So going to the Green New Deal and how the feminist perspective is related to Green New Deals, I think that perhaps you don't need much information about, because there is a lot of public talking around the Green New Deal, but just very briefly, this is a proposal that has been put together in the past, at least since the crisis, since the 2008 crisis. So the first Green New Deal proposals have originated around that period, 2008, 2009. But then as a response to the financial crisis. But as a response to the financial crisis in terms of recovery of the economic system, in the sense of job creation, and also investment in public services, in social reproduction, in a new way, in a way that is not just Keynesian in the old sense of the New Deal, but it's also green in the sense of taking seriously and addressing the climate crisis and the crisis of biodiversity and extinction that is threatening us all. And the Green New Deals are, there is one in the United States you might be more familiar with. There are today a number of also different critical articulation of the Green New Deal approach. For example, there's a global Green New Deal that is more, or a red deal, that are more, let's say, focusing more firmly on global inequalities and on colonialism and racism as structural elements of the crisis. And the feminist Green New Deal, this is what I wanted to focus upon today, is also a proposal that has been around more recently, since 2019. And this proposal comes from a platform of not only feminists, but also social justice organizations that have been working together around a platform, around a number of principles, so that the Green New Deal is also feminist, no? Takes into account feminist, a feminist approach. So here are some of the most well-known organizations that have been promoting the feminist Green New Deal. First of all, We Can, the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, international organization. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but this is an organization, an eco-feminist organization led by Indigenous women, and it's based in North America, but it also has groups in different parts of the world. Then the Women's Working Group on Finance for Development, which is a group working on budget issues from a feminist point of view. Budget issues are related to development politics. The Women's Environment and Development Organization, also based in North America. WIN, the Women's Environmental Network, based in the UK. These are among the promoters of the feminist Green New Deal, and these are almost all of them can be understood as eco-feminist groups that have been around for a very long time, since the 80s, some of them, and so to me this is a very important fact that testifies to how the ecofeminist movement is showing interest towards the Green New Deal proposal with a critical approach, but also a constructive criticism that is aimed at co-producing a better Green New Deal, a Green New Deal that really can really make a difference. Then there are these two other platforms on the left, the Green New Deal for Europe and Global Women's Strike, which are related to each other. These organizations are not part of the feminist Green New Deal platform, but they have been, I mean, it's one organization, the Global Women's Strike. The Global Women's Strike has been promoting its own approach to the Green New Deal, in the sense that it has actively contributed to the Green New Deal for Europe. So the Green New Deal for Europe is a Green New Deal plan that was put forward in 2019 and 2020. By a political movement in Europe that's called DiEM25, which is a transnational movement for democracy in Europe. And this platform is a co-production between activist scholars from different areas, including degrowth scholars. I myself have also contributed to this plan, together with other degrowth scholars, climate justice scholars, activists, and also scholars and activists in in social and solidarity economy, in the commoning movement. So the Green New Deal for Europe has a very strong climate justice approach, in the sense that the whole plan is geared towards recognizing the global interconnections between the European economy and the global economy, and not only the economy, of course. So the fact that whatever policy proposals, economic public policies are implemented in Europe have an impact upon the rest of the world. So the principle that inspires the Green New Deal for Europe is the basic principle is that of devising policy measures that tend to minimize this impact, or or even compensate for past impacts that the European economy has had on the rest of the world, and also on the climate crisis. But what is most interesting here is that while we were working on the plan, there were one section of the plan devoted to the policies in addressing the employment crisis, addressing the loss of jobs, and also the work more broadly. And so by working on that section of the plan, Giacomo D'Alisa and myself were working on that section of the plan, and we wanted to adopt a social reproduction approach, working, seeing work not only as paid jobs in the sectors that are going to be phased out due to the climate crisis, but also very much more broadly taking into account care work and all the care work that is both paid and unpaid. And we wanted to make an effort to include care work, and especially unpaid care work, unpaid social reproduction, as part of this Green New Deal. Because we thought perhaps other Green New Deals were not so inclusive in terms when it came to care work, and especially unpaid care work. And this was the moment when we met with the Global Women's Strike. The Global Women's Strike is a global organization based in the UK, based in London, which is led by a historical figure of the feminist movement, Selma James. Selma James was among the founders, together with Maria Rosa Dalla Costa and Silvia Federici and Margaret Prescott, and many others, of the Wages for Housework movement back in the 70s. And the Wages for Housework movement was, let's say, was very active during the 70s. But at some point, it started to evolve towards. It was always an international movement, but during the 80s and 90s, it started to get involved more and more with global women's politics, with the UN Women, and with the Women's Budget Group, also in the UK, which also works on a global perspective on the the gender inequalities in care work, and the recognition of women's work in care and social reproduction. So one of their main achievements over the past 5 decades, because this is an organization that this year is celebrates its 50th anniversary. One of the greatest achievements was the UN recognition of the not recognition, but accounting of the value, the value of unpaid care work in the global economy. That, of course, it's a very important, but at the very same time contradictory politics, because valuing is in the capitalist system. Valuing has precise meaning. It means an evaluation, a market valuation in terms of money in the labor market. And so this is a delicate point that is being heavily criticized for its the risk of commodifying care work. So I wanted to I wanted to say more on that, but before going there, let me just give you a brief overview of what are the feminist Green New Deal principles. The principles on which the whole feminist Green New Deal platform and all the organizations, there are 40 organizations that have been working on this platform. The principles on which all 40 organizations agree. So, and this is very important to me because, of course, this is a very original approach to the Green New Deal, to what a Green New Deal must mean. So the first point is intersectionality. The fact that the Green New Deal must be anti-sexist, anti-racist, and against the exploitation of work in all its forms. So this is something that you don't find in other Green New Deal platforms, and that clearly comes from the feminist movement, but especially from Black feminism, from Indigenous feminism, from the feminism of more recent development in feminist, also in feminist theory. Then there is the principle of decoloniality, multilateralism, and justice, global economic justice. So justice in global trade, in global finance, and in the tax system. And this comes from those organizations that are contributing to the platform, which have been for many years involved in the politics of financing for development. So here the point is that there can be no purely national Green New Deal. Green New Deal must be global and decolonial, or it cannot. It's not the Green New Deal. It's not a feminist Green New Deal. It's not a Green New Deal that we want to struggle for. Then there is the point of decommodification, which is also peculiar to the feminist Green New Deal, in the sense that the feminist Green New Deal is a struggle for commoning, for decommodifying work and nature, and in the spirit that Soraya was mentioning before, in the spirit of subsistence and provisioning, which are key words in feminist economics. And then there is the point of reproductive justice. This is also something that is original from the feminist Green New Deal, and you don't find in other Green New Deals. And here there is, of course, the struggle for the autonomy of women over their bodies and reproductive work, and also on their sexuality. This is something that is very strong with the Ni Una Menos movement and all the organizations that are struggling for against gender violence and for abortion rights and for the women control over their bodies. And this, of course, has to do also with the Green New Deal, because one of the problematics with let's say one of the main drivers of both the ecological crisis and the reproductive crisis has been the states and capitals forcing women to produce children, to produce cheap labor, basically, as Jason Moore would say it. This is a very important point in a feminist Green New Deal. Democratization also is a key word here. This is common to other Green New Deal, but what is meant by democracy and economic democracy here is fostering the leadership of local communities, women's leadership, indigenous leadership, and youth leadership in the design and implementation of Green New Deal policies. So it's a very bottom-up approach to what policies are to be included in what kind of policies are to be included in a Green New Deal plan. This should come not only from a technocratic, let's say, approach from economists, no matter how open-minded they might be, but it should come from these different social movement leadership. Then, of course, there is the point about care work, which is the one that I've been most interested in, but it's related to everything else. But this is the point about centering care and regenerative economies, by which this is a very revolutionary point that is also partially common to other Green New Deals, in the sense of investing in social reproduction, in public services, in care, and in all that work that regenerates people and non-human nature. But of course, this is very let's say, also very problematic for global capitalism, and it's also problematic for the Green New Deal, the feminist Green New Deal movement, because, as I was mentioning before, here we have the contradiction emerging of the care economy becoming more and more a frontier of accumulation, of capitalism investing in turning care into a commodity, and so going in the opposite direction of all the other points that we were mentioning before. So this is the problematic point. I will return on that in the next two slides. Then there is the principle of divestment from fossil capital, from the prison complex, and from the military. These are all points that also come from decades-long work in feminist organization, and especially from Black and Indigenous feminists. Finally, the point of rejecting the false solutions. So rejecting the, let's say, the green growth approach, rejecting investments or policies that do not take all the previous points into consideration. So these principles are all interconnected to one another, and only taking them together we can work towards a feminist Green New Deal. Now, so here very briefly, let's focus on the point of care work. Why is care work important to a Green New Deal? So I would, this is my, let's say, systematization of the debate. I see these 3 points. First of all, care work is essential to human well-being, but at the same time, it's low carbon work. So it's investing in care work means creating jobs or supporting, creating income, generating income in low carbon activities. So this is very important also in the perspective of greening our economic system in a way that doesn't imply more sacrifice, but in a way that implies in increasing human well-being. Second, care work is being increasingly burdened due to the climate-related disasters, and now the COVID-19 pandemic. So there is here a matter of justice, of supporting the work which is essential and must be done, and nonetheless, despite being so important and so essential to human well-being, it's overburdened, and it was already, it's always been overburdened, but it is particularly so for example, after climate disasters and in the pandemic, precisely because it is unrecognized and unsupported by economic policies, because it's not considered work that creates enough growth or profit. And third, the care for the environment. This is also a very important point that has been emerging more recently. The care for the environment, for example, the care work that indigenous and peasant communities perform towards on the land, enhances biodiversity, protects, defends, and enhances biodiversity, and this responds to also the other greatest threat that life on Earth is experiencing these days. So these are, I would say, the three main motivations for talking about care work in the Green New Deal. Now, I wanted to delve a little bit more in depth into the issue of how, what does this mean in practice? No, all this talk of care and Green New Deal. What does this imply? So, what do Green New Deal feminists want? I would say the answer is smash heteropatriarchy, because if you look at all the principles of the feminist Green New Deal that we were seeing before, basically can be understood as aspects, different dimensions of the heteropatriarchal system. And heteropatriarchy to me is, and not only to me, to many feminists and ecological economists, means the devaluation of care, no? But how? The point is how. So I see here there are two divergent priorities. Beyond a common point that is investing in care services and care infrastructures, and this is a demand that is almost common to all Green New Deals. Then I see two diverging priorities. and what kind of investments, what do we mean by investing in care services? In the feminist Green New Deal, by some analysis of the different documents that have been produced so far over the past 2 years, I see I see emerging this as the most representative approach. It's the approach of equal opportunities. So ensuring equal access to green job opportunities for all genders. So not only women, but all genders. And this is the approach that those organizations within the platform that have been working on devising Green New Deal policy plans in the USA and in the UK have been adopting this kind of approach, as far as I know. So correct me if I'm wrong. If you know of other more recent documents that take a different approach, I would be happy to hear that. But as far as I could see, this was the main approach. The Green New Deal is investing in the creation of green jobs, and these green jobs must be equally shared with all genders. Of course, this means that we should include care jobs in the green job category. So this is a sort of shift difference with other Green New Deal plans, because when they speak of green jobs, they speak of jobs in energy, infrastructures, construction, the greening of these sectors. So from a feminist point of view, the green job sector should be understood more broadly, including care and social reproduction work. Then I see a second approach that has been, it's the approach that has been mostly brought forward by the Green New Deal for Europe and the Global Women's Strike. And this is approach that I would call the entitlement approach. So the idea is that caregivers are entitled to money because they, as like everybody else, caregivers need money to survive in the capitalist economy. And so they are entitled to direct cash transfers or other forms of material support directly supporting unpaid caregivers, be they in homes, in communities, or in the biophysical environment. So this is an approach that I myself have been contributing to through collaboration with the Global Women's Strike around a campaign that they have put forward in 2020, and it's still going on, the care income campaign. And care income was one of the policy proposals that we included in the Green New Deal for Europe. So what do we mean by care income? We mean the fact that basic a living wage or basic income should be, I mean, the unpaid caregivers are entitled to that. So this is a policy that differs from the universal basic income. And so this is a bit of a controversial point because most of the feminist organizations lately have been adopting a universal basic income approach, and the care income always reminds people of the wages for housework and the limitations of that kind of demand. Not only the limitations, but also the misunderstandings and the critique that came from within the feminist movement against the wages for housework. And so there has been some, let's say, some difficulty in promoting the care income as something new and original, because it's something that incorporates 5 decades of also of discussions, of critique and response, of experience in mobilizing around women's unpaid work. So the care income cannot be automatically understood as a wages for housework. And first of all, we should always remember that wages for housework was not wages for housewives. Wages for housework was about paying for domestic work, no matter the gender, and it was not meant to lock women in the kitchen, as some feminists have been continue to say nowadays. So the care income is something different because it incorporates the acknowledgement and recognition of the also the ecological relevance of unpaid caregiving. So the unpaid caregivers are not just domestic unpaid domestic caregivers, but also people who invest their time and energies in taking care of their communities, of the territories, like, for example, the environmental justice movement that in most cases is made up of Black and Indigenous and working class women working for protecting the health of their communities and of their territories, no? Or, for example, in the peasant movement, small farmers and peasant farmers who are fighting against agrotoxics and investing their time and work in producing healthy food. So all that should be considered as unpaid caregiving, because it's care work that is not recognized by the market, is not valued by the market, but at the same time, it's essential to human and non-human well-being. So the idea here is to support, invest, and public investments in supporting the caregivers by recognizing the importance of the social relevance of their work, and also the equality of their work with respect to other forms of work in society. So there is also an element of justice here in this kind of in this demand. Okay.
Yeah,
I think my 30 minutes are over. Yes.
Yes, please wrap up in another minute or two. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no. I just I will conclude here because I'm sure that there will be questions and comments, and I'm very looking forward to discussing this with you. Thank you.
All right, I don't know if folks can hear me or not. All right, thank you so much, Stefania, for this provocative and inspiring and generous talk, which gives us much to think about and discuss. To get us going on that score, let me first introduce Dr. Angele Alook, and then invite her to offer us a first response before we open things up for discussion. Angele, just for a short period of time, 10 minutes or so. Anyway, Dr. Angele Alook is an assistant professor in the School of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies at York University. As a member of Big Stone Cree Nation in Treaty 8 territory, her research is mainly focused on the political economy of oil and gas in Alberta. She specializes in Indigenous feminisms, life course approaches, Indigenous research methodologies, cultural identity, and the sociology of family and work. She is a co-investigator on the SSHRC-funded corporate mapping project, where she completed research with the Parkland Institute on Indigenous experiences in Alberta's oil industry and its gendered impact on working families. Angele is also a member of the Just Powers research team. And through the Just Powers project, Angele has been able to produce a documentary called Pikopawen, It Is Broken, which features stories of the land with Indigenous traditional land users, environmental officers, and elders. She is directing her research towards a just transition of Alberta's labor force and the impact climate change has on Treaty 8 territory. Over to you, Angele.
Thank you very much, Sarayan. And thank you very much, Stefania. You know, I was really getting happy and excited throughout your presentation, Stefania, because these are things that I've been thinking about for the past couple of years. I'm in the middle of co-publishing a book called The End of This World, Decolonial Just Transition in So-Called Canada. And for that book, I was tasked to write a chapter on building caring economies in Canada. And so what I tried to do with that chapter was use Indigenous social systems and laws of care to rebuild an economy that values both paid and unpaid care work, and also Indigenous understandings of caring for the environment, and that, you know, we have non-human and human relations that we have to care for. So I was very happy to be a part of this talk. I don't know where to begin, but, you know, as you were speaking about a feminist Green New Deal and some of the authors and special issues of feminist economics that you were mentioning, I was thinking, oh, I've read those. That's so great. And I've also, you know, been looking at the women's budget group in the UK and comparing that to policies we have here in Canada. And kind of everything you were saying, you know, I've been thinking very deeply about, and especially these feminist Green New Deal principles of intersectionality, decoloniality, decommodification, centering care and regenerative economies, democratization, divestment from fossil capital, and rejecting fossil solutions. And these are really excellent principles and match a lot of principles that I've been considering for my own project, The End of This World, but also for a new project I'm working on with at York University called Indigenous Climate Leadership. So I've seen this connection, especially coming from, I formerly worked for AUPE, which is one of the largest private sector unions in Alberta. And our union members were care workers. We had social workers, nurses, those that work in healthcare, those that do administrative work for the education system. We unionized a lot of long-term care facilities, which are often privatized in Canada. And I've been really thinking about this, the importance of care work as part of our economy. And part of my work at the union was looking at the wages of care workers and how underpaid childcare workers are, how underpaid care workers in long-term care facilities are paid. They're very undervalued. So I've been thinking about these things a lot. And then in my research on Indigenous workers in the oil industry, I've been looking at the unpaid work of women and specifically Indigenous women. And, I came across things like in Alberta, at the time I was doing my research in 2017, 2019, I found that Alberta had the highest rate. Women in Alberta do more unpaid hours of work per week than any other part of Canada. And I can only, assume that's because of our lack of affordable childcare in Alberta, but also because it's a huge resource extraction industry where a lot of the people that work in resource extraction are men, and they're not at home to do that care work. So I kind of made that correlation in my mind about, how important paid care work is in our economy, and also how important unpaid work is, and how this really needs to be taken into consideration in a Green New Deal, especially because a lot of, these policies in Green New Deals of Build Back Better, it really relies on this idea of construction, build more sustainable houses, build more offices for green economy projects. It really focuses on building and construction. And I know I read a study in that Feminist Economist special issue that said that actually we need to start investing in care work more than in building things, because investing in care work actually levels the playing field of the labor market, because women who often work, and racialized women who often work in care work, will be paid better if we invest in care work. Women who want to do paid work can participate in the labor market if they have access to childcare, if we have universal affordable long-term care, because a lot of our current generation is kind of this sandwich generation, caring for children, but also caring for seniors. So if we could invest in universal affordable childcare and universal affordable long-term care, that will free up the labor for women to participate in the labor market. But then there's also this issue of, well, are we just freeing up women's unpaid labor by investing in the labor, investing in care economies? Are we freeing up women's labor to just participate in a capitalist system and grow our economies even more? So I really understand that contradiction that Stefania was talking about earlier, where she talked about, should we be commodifying care work? And that, as someone that comes from the labor movement, that's a really difficult question, because, a lot of, well, it's mostly racialized women in lower paid jobs that do care work. A lot of, in Alberta, we have healthcare aides, and we have licensed practical nurses that are often underpaid doing care work. Child care workers are underpaid. So what the work that unions do is that they do wage comparators, and they compare the wage of women in care jobs to other similar positions to try to raise the wages of these jobs. And so there's always this like comparison and constant need for valuation of care work that unions do. So, that's a great deal of the work that unions do, is negotiating collective agreements so that we have fair, equitable wages for our care workers. And in Canada, we have a higher rate of unionization among public sector workers, which are primarily women. So a lot of this work that unions are doing in Canada are to increase the wages of public sector care workers that are women. But at the same time, when you commodify care work, you're commodifying it as part of a capitalist system, which is built on growth. And, part of that whole system where we measure GDP and in Alberta, especially, the economy there is measured by the price of oil and the price of truck sales and the price of natural gas. And so this whole growth economy that we're working to increase women's wages for is not beneficial to the environment, because the Canadian government just keeps reinvesting in oil and gas and subsidizing those industries. And that is one thing, that I've had discussions with my friends at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and my friends in the labor movement. We've talked about this need to invest in childcare, long-term care, healthcare, education, and divest from fossil fuels. Labor economists in Canada have done these calculations that said, if we invest in an affordable universal childcare, it will practically pay for itself by increasing the amount of women that are in the labor force. If we improve our healthcare system, that'll increase the likelihood of more people working. And so these systems often pay for themselves when you invest in them, more than, investing in construction and things like that, which is all good. So I really agree with all of these feminist Green New Deal principles. The issue I have is when we try to make these principles and policies intersectional and decolonial. And so let me just start by talking about how the issue with making these policies decolonial. So one of the things in Canada that we've been doing, among researchers dealing with the Green New Deal and the labor movement, one thing we've been talking about is we put out these alternative budgets every year. So the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives does an alternative budget, an alternative federal budget every year. And so oftentimes in this alternative budget, we say increase the amount of funding for healthcare, childcare, education, decrease subsidies to oil and gas, increase funding for gender-based violence, and increase funding for gender-based violence shelters and things like that. Increase funding for accessible, affordable housing, because we know housing is not affordable right now in Canadian cities. And then, that should fix things and make things more equitable, which also goes towards a Green New Deal. However, when we look at this issue with budgets, it's a really different thing for First Nations who consider themselves sovereign nations and really wish to have a nation-to-nation relationship with Canada. Indigenous sovereignty in Canada is not recognized. And this is especially so because of our alienation to our traditional lands. Indigenous people live on reserves that only take up 2% of the land base in Canada. Prince Charles is here this week in Canada. I'm on TV as this Indigenous person was playing a drum. And he was there giving a speech talking about the history of Canada and the Queen. And I was just thinking, you need to give our land back. We need our land back, because without our land, we can't access land for our traditional subsistence practices. We can't access the land to build viable local economies. Give us our land back. And I was sitting there with my husband, whose family is Jamaican. And I was thinking, you know what? Also, you need to give reparations back to Jamaican people. So I was very upset watching the monarchy on television the other day, thinking, you need to give Indigenous people land back. You sold Rupert's land, which is half of Canada, to the monarchy's cousin for tens of millions of dollars. And that money was taken from my people. Our land was taken and sold privately between people in the monarchy. And then parts of Jamaica, are asking for reparations. I was just watching Prince Charles thinking, you need to give us our land back. You need to give us reparations. Anyways, that happened earlier this week. And another thing with Indigenous people in Canada is our funding arrangements that determine how much funding, public funding we get for social programs like education, healthcare. All of those funding programs for Indigenous people are federally funded, which are underfunded from the provincial funding arrangements. So right off the bat, Indigenous people are underfunded in all of our social programs. We're impoverished because of our land alienation. We can't even have viable local economies because of this. And sometimes First Nations who are trying to assert their sovereignty are accused of mismanaging funds given to them by the federal government, which comes from the sale of our lands. And we end up under third-party management where we can't even properly access federal funds. So, you know, it's all good and nice to have budgets in Canada, to have budgets in the UK that fund care work better. But in Canada, we have our hands tied because of the Indian Act and the way First Nations people are funded. And the only way I can see a way out of that is if we got rid of the Indian Act and Indigenous peoples were allowed to assert their sovereignty. And one of the only ways I can see that happening is through the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People being fully implemented in Canada. Because in Canada, we already have certain programs where we fund care work. Like we have employment insurance where we get paternity, maternity leave from. We had CERB, the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit during the pandemic. That was basically a basic income for many Canadians. We have the child tax benefit, which if we increase that for stay-at-home parents, that would be like a basic income. So there are a lot of existing policies in Canada that would allow for us to smash heteropatriarchy and also, you know, create more value in care work. But I think we really need to examine our current colonial system, which really impacts the social and health funding that Indigenous people get right now. So I think I'm going to stop right there. Yeah. Also, there's continues to be a lot of anti-Black racism in Canada. I just spent the morning trying to find a physician and healthcare for my children, and I'm convinced that some of the physicians' offices in my community in North York are racist. I don't think they're taking my husband and children because they are Black. So now I'm having to go to other parts of Toronto to find care, to find physicians. And so, you know, when we say intersectionality, I don't think it can be just, I don't think you can just say we need an intersectional approach to feminist Green New Deal. There's a lot of specifics in policies that really need to be re-examined, because I feel like the feminist Green New Deal at times is made for white middle-class women, and it really doesn't take into account the realities of Indigenous, immigrant, racialized two-spirit families. So yeah, I really enjoyed the talk, and I really liked the feminist Green New Deal principles. I think I would adhere to all of them, but when you actually apply them to policy, it gets really tricky because of our colonial history in Canada. I think I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Angele. Thanks so much for this. While folks are thinking of their questions and observations they want to make, I'm just going to invite Stefania if she wants to make a brief response to anything that Angele, any points Angele raised, and then we're going to start into our Q&A and hopefully be able to take at least a few questions. It's getting pretty late where Stefania is and so on, but we'll see what we can do.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you so much, Angele. I think that you are raising very important issues. I just basically learned from you, so I'm going to have to give it some thought to what you just said. To me, what is really interesting is what you said about. Well, first of all, I didn't know Canada had such amazing policies, so that's good to hear. But it's also tricky, as you say, because these are the policies that in other parts of the world, feminist movements, and particularly the global women's strike, are really, really struggling for, no? And so. So thinking that these are not the, or at least not a universal answer that might be good for everyone, it's something important to keep in mind. But also important to keep in mind that getting access to these entitlements will not by default necessarily mean changing the system. And I think this is the key point that we need to talk about. If we wanted to, if what we want is really changing the system and not just get recognition for unpaid care work and getting some material support, which is by itself something valuable and important, but it's not enough. If we want to really change the system, then we must also think of going beyond that. And I very much like what you said. I think that giving back the land, reparations also, and sovereignty, it's something that should be given up more space in the feminist Green New Deal, as far as I can see. I think it is a little bit of a pity that from going from all those nice principles to designing policies like creating green jobs for women, it's you know, it's a bit of a very reductive step, no? So it cannot be just that, right? Green New Deal, feminist Green New Deal cannot just be creating more green jobs for women. It cannot even be just paying for care work. There must be something more, because otherwise we are not going to smash heteropatriarchy, the colonial heteropatriarchy. I think the reparation, so far I have encountered the reparation concept that comes from the colonial movements, and I have encountered this concept also in terms of climate justice, in the sense of when we're talking of climate politics, it's key to recognize there is a debt of colonizing the colonizing world towards the colonized world, because an ecological debt that is also because of course the ecological crisis, the colonizing world, the colonizer world has produced the ecological crisis, and it's done so by impoverishing and taking the land of indigenous people and by enslaving Black people. So this is a talk that is not really there when we talk in climate politics, especially when climate politics is talked about global governance settings. No, so I think it's very, the concept of climate debt. I think it's very important to recognize that you know, I mean, really the key here is reparation. It's not about greening the economy or making growth green so that we can continue, you know, on the same path. The issue here is recognizing that we wouldn't have this crisis at this point in history if we didn't have colonization and enslavement. So recognizing that is really, so I'm just trying to you know, connect the dot and think on of how this general principle should also be a guiding principle of the feminist Green New Deal. So I think more should be, yeah, I agree with you that more work should be done in that direction.
Thank you so much, Stefania. I'm going to turn things now over to our audience on the call for questions and observations, rejoinders. I am conscious that it's getting pretty late in the day for, it's been a long day for Stefania, I'm sure, but these are very important issues that we're talking about and so on. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to take at least a few questions. Folks, if you use your raise hand tool, I'll manage a speakers list and call upon you for your turn. If you've spoken already once, well, I don't know if we'll have a chance to go through a number of turns given where we are at with the time. But anyway, let's just see what questions are out there, and please do use the raise hand tool.
Questions or even criticism or comments or contributions to the conversation. I don't necessarily have answers.
Yes, all of those things. Let me see if I'm seeing everything here.
I think there are quite some comments in the chat.
Okay. Let me see. I don't see a question in the chat, but let me ask one question while people are thinking of questions, and this goes back to the key point that both Angele and you, Stefania, sort of ended on in terms of the issue of the history of colonialism in relationship to this kind of impossible but necessary space of a politics involving the state that, of course, you know, all the different versions of the Green New Deal and so on evoke the necessity of this of a politics at the level of the state to be able to endure the crisis while a movement emerges that might be possible to actually engage in systemic change and so on, right? And my question for you, I guess, would be, you know, this has got to be a local politics, but it has to be globally coordinated in some kind of way as well. And the Green New Deal as a kind of thing, do you think, like in Canada, there was an attempt to have a Green New Deal politics in the last set of elections, and it went nowhere. Will that language, will this political imaginary still be something that might be a way to move forward? That would be my question.
Okay. Well, I didn't know this about Canada, and then, but it sounds a little bit like what happened in the United States, no, with the Green New Deal there. So yeah, the Green New Deal might be already fading away as a slogan, but no matter how you call it, I mean, there is another also platform strategy, which is the just transition, no? So which is very similar, and Angele was also mentioning it before. But it comes more specifically from labor, from the labor movement, but also it's also been reclaimed by indigenous communities and racialized communities to make it more inclusive and also more systemic, no? Because originally just transition coming from the labor movement was mostly about compensating workers in the fossil sectors, in industries to be phased out, etc., which was a very important principle, of course, that the principle that climate policies should not exacerbate existing inequalities and be paid for by those who are perhaps already paying the price for so many things. But of course, it's not just workers in mining, for example, who are going to pay for the climate crisis. It's many other communities that have been historically paying a high price, and that should be the subjects of designing a just transition. So just transition is also something that I've been looking at in the past few years, and it's already also been appropriated by the, for example, by the European Commission. Europe now has its own just transition strategy, which goes in a completely different direction. It goes in the direction of investing in the green economy, investing in green capitalism, basically. So it's not very just at all, because for example, it's investing in all this emphasis on the electric cars, which rely a lot on the extraction of lithium, and lithium, we all know, it comes from specific territories and affects specific groups of people, and so both in Europe and outside of Europe. So this is not from a climate justice perspective, this is not acceptable as a response, but yet nonetheless the European Union calls it just transition strategy. So there are a lot of always struggles within and contradictions within let's say within the climate front. So these contradictions also lead to the lack of success, perhaps, no, of certain platforms. The thing is that I do think that we need to talk about these platforms, because these are ways of making the climate justice conversation sound realistic in a way, no, in the sense of radical realism, no, of a realism that is not capitalist realism, no. So I mean, to me, it's important to have a realist politics that is not capitalist, that is not colonial, that is not sexist, like the one we have had so far, like the TINA, there is no alternative politics that we've had so far. So it is important to me, it is important to to build policy platforms. They can never be perfect. They can never be, good enough. No, to me they are platform where people can meet, imagine and design policies and demand and struggle for things, but also walk together towards, also apply criticism and self-criticism and learn from mistakes and walk towards, together towards perhaps different proposals or different demands, but always with with the aim of doing countering the public policies that are delivered to us. So yeah, that's my answer.
There's a question from Pierre Smith Hanna. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Suryan, and thank you, Stefania and Angele, for your talks. I just wanted to have a follow-up question on what Stefania just said, actually, on this concept of making these kind of radical proposals realistic. So I was curious to know, how have these feminist Green New Deals been received? How have people reacted to them? And I'm thinking maybe people who are in policy circles or who are in government. How have they reacted to these? And what could be done to make them more realistic? Or do you think they are already realistic? Something that came to mind in the chat when in your talk, Stefania, you were talking about remuneration for paid work, for unpaid care work, sorry. Are there figures, for example, that have been plotted out for what would be a fair and just level of remuneration for example, parenting? And have these been piloted somewhere in a country? Or these are the kind of questions that I have now in terms of the feasibility and the realism of the plans on one side, and then the reaction. How have these proposals been received?
Yeah, that's a good question. As for the feminist Green New Deal, I don't know, honestly. I'm just, for the moment, I've just been looking at their websites, platform, and policy documents that they have been publishing. Specifically in the UK, this Women's Budget Group and Women's Environment Network have been working, and Shirley McGregor and Maeve Cohen have been working on policy proposals. And these are the policy proposals, the more realistic that we can imagine on how to include specifically women in green jobs creation. So they are very realistic. There are figures on how many jobs, very similar to what Angele was also mentioning before, how many jobs can be created in for care in the Green New Deal, and how this would respond, how this would pay for itself, and how this would allow how many people, and specifically how many women would be allowed to access the job market, etc., etc. All this is very realistic. There is nothing, I would say, too ambitious about these things. When it comes to the so how they have been received in the UK, I don't know. This is something that should be investigated upon. When it comes to the care income proposal, it's more complicated in that case, because the idea is that there cannot be universal definition of what is the minimum level or something like that. It's case specific and context specific. So the care income campaign is much more like a principle more than concrete proposals. No, it's by launching the principle that that care work should be always supported economically. Then this could take different forms in different contexts. For example, there are groups that are affiliated with the Global Women's Strike in Thailand, and this group is actually their way of interpreting the care income is about access to land. These are it's about fighting dispossession, and it's a community made of women subsistence farmers and women indigenous farmers in Thailand, who are actually fighting for maintaining access to their land against government policies. And so the care income for them, it's been a way of demanding their entitlement to that land as a recognition of the care work that they perform on that land, of taking care of that land and of the people, of course, in their communities. So the care income is very much a principle that the idea is that different communities in different struggling, this is a very key principle of the Global Women's Strike. It's based on the principle of autonomy, so that each group would define their own battles and their own forms and their own ways of their own demands, starting from the common principle of investing in the slogan is investing in caring, not killing, that recalls the idea of divestment from fossil fuels, because fossil fuels are killing people and non-humans.
Well, we'll get a chance to keep talking about these kinds of issues tomorrow in our session, which will also be about the feminist Green New Deal, as well as on the work that FADA does. I'd like to invite all of you on the call now to join me in thanking our speakers today, Dr. Stefania Barca and Dr. Angele Alook, for their thoughtful, generous, and inspiring words on such urgent issues. So bravo, bravo to you all. I also want to thank Casey Germain and Amy Lee from the Kule Institute for all their technical and logistical help in organizing today's talk. And I also want to express my gratitude to my Kule Scholars colleagues for their support and encouragement. And lastly, but not least, I want to thank all of you on the call for taking the time to participate in these important discussions. As I said goodbye to you all, remember that the Roundtable seminar tomorrow will begin at 11 a.m. MST, again here on Zoom. So with that, bye for now. Take care, everybody.